Hola, ¿me escuchan? Ya tengo señal en YouTube, por si acaso. Ya abrieron el grifo, como dicen. Que ya tenemos la señal en YouTube, ya se está transmitiendo. Ya abrieron la señal. Pero se está filtrando, ¿ah? La voz. Que ya tenemos la señal en YouTube, ya se está transmitiendo. Ya abrieron la señal. Pero se está filtrando, ¿ah? La voz. Héctor. Hola. ¿Podemos rodar el video de agenda? Están rodando la transición.
160 million Latin Americans and Caribbeans do not have access to safe water, and more than 430 million still do not have safe access to sanitation. This endangers the health of people in the region and requires substantial increase in infrastructure investment for this sector and regulations and governance to water access in the region. How to increase finance, both public and private, to guarantee economic efficiency, social equity, and environmental balance to meet the SDGs. The Latin American Development Bank presents finance and governance of water in Latin America and the Caribbean towards Dakar 2022, an international high-level event gathering national public sector, private sector, and civil society representatives to learn about the initiatives taken by the most relevant sectors on this subject and consolidate the view on hydric water security in the region towards the World Water Forum to be held in Dakar 2022 and Senegal. Finance and governance of water in Latin America and the Caribbean towards Dakar 2022. Welcome, CAF, Latin American Development Bank. Good morning to all of you. I'm Alejandro Macera, Director of Water, and I would like to welcome the finance and governance of water in Latin America and the Caribbean towards Dakar 2022. Organized by CAF and member of the World Water Council in the framework of preparing to the 9th World Water Forum. The mission is to mobilize action on water in all the levels. It is in charge of organizing the World Water Forum, which will be held in March 2022 in Dakar, Senegal. As part of this virtual conference, we will have in the next 2 days high-level panels analyzing the initiatives taken by the different countries, financial institutions, and civil society representatives from their own responsibilities based on finance and governance of water. In addition, we'll be able to see the messages of the leaders in the region and international institutions connected to water. The idea is to consolidate the view of Latin America and the Caribbean about water with challenges, success stories, and specific recommendations to be briefed in a document preparing for the 9th World Water Forum. This will express the views on the continent with more than 30% of water resources, with important achievements and also important challenges ahead. Before starting this day, I would like you to join me in social media towards Dakar 2022 and follow the event on Agenda CAF and AGUA. We also have simultaneous interpretation in English and Portuguese. You can access it in your devices. Without further ado, we're going to start the session with Sergio Díaz-Granados, Executive President of CAF. Let's listen to his message. I would like to warmly welcome you to the Regional Conference on Water Management, vital resource for sustainable development, especially really important in the era of COVID-19. I would like to greet Lord Fujon and the leaders of Latin America who have shared their messages, all the team and the panelists joining us today. There was an important event heading to this. It is important to consolidate the objective on the objectives, duplicate the resources, and meet the promise of 16 million annually to these projects. Many states that climate crisis is a water crisis. Climate change is mainly manifested through impact on the biological cycle with serious economic and social consequences. The regional context states that 160 million Latin American and Caribbeans do not have safe access to water, and more than 140 million do not have access to sanitation. This states that the conference is timely to focus on two issues: finance and governance of water. I'm sure that this space will allow us to discuss and find the voice that Latin America and the Caribbean can take to the 9th World Water Forum. This is the objective of CAF as part of the governance of water governance, to have a joint view to address the challenges and sustainability and on water. The current rate of production will not be able to meet the SDGs. If it follows the current trend, some of the goals will only be met in 2045. So we need to increase finance to the sector. This will also require public resources and catalyzing private resources, for instance, through combined finance to replicate this in the water sector. We need to agree, as in Glasgow, the climate funds for a resilience agenda in the region. First, to improve access, human right to drinking water and sanitation. Another gap that needs finance is the treatment of wastewater. It is imperative to reduce contamination of water and promote circular economy through treated water and biogas generation, among other objectives. Here, we need to strengthen the lines combining gray and green infrastructure. These and other measures require proper planning in the absence of studies, which has been a restriction in the region. In CAF, we are implementing a investment in water plan to speed up implementation of funding in the region. More investment also needs favorable environment, and this reminds me another important issue: governance of water. Latin America and the Caribbean has advanced on the management of water resources, but it's below international standards. We need to regulate the efforts of water availability, important for a region that has a resource that is asymmetrically distributed in the region. Governance should also aim at the performance of water providers, needs accountability to know the level of service important for legitimacy. To reach the SDGs, we need to move ahead fair and green growth in the region. This is what we understand from CAF. And let me confirm our commitment in COP26. CAF will be the green bank of Latin America and the Caribbean. This has important multiple implications. In the next 5 years, we will give Latin America and the Caribbean $25 billion through direct investment to preserve biodiversity and the resources. I wish you all the success in this conference, and let's hope we can assume the objectives in the region to take to Dakar 2022, joining the efforts to face the challenges and opportunities we have ahead. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, President Díaz Granados. And now we have Louis Fujon, President of the World Water Council.
Distinguished delegates, dear friends of water, good morning to you all. Unfortunately, I could not be online with you today, but I'm very honored to deliver opening remarks for this conference on water and governance in Latin America and the Caribbean towards Dakar 2022. And I would like to start by addressing a special and warm thank you to the Latin American Development Bank for this kind invitation. For many years, the bank has been a valued member for Board of Governors, and I would like to congratulate Mr. Suarez and Mr. Rojas on the remarkable work they have been doing for the Council and the Forum. In fact, CAF is currently chairing the Council's task force on financing water. For the past months, they have been working on a report on the topic of blended finance. The report will be published soon, but I wanted to share with you a few key points. We need more ambitious commitments from both the public and private sector, along with more productive users of water. We need a supportive, enabling environment for financing water. This includes the presence of adequate policy, institutional and regulatory frameworks. It also requires a functional judicial system, public infrastructure that is fit for purpose and adherence to international rules of law. We need viable projects that are suitable for investment. And finally, we need experienced personnel to design, develop, and successfully implement these projects. We need capacity building on the financial and administrative level. Ladies and gentlemen, finance and governance are two elements of the utmost importance to deliver on our ambitions to provide equitable water and sanitation security for all. The situation is well known. Despite all the progress achieved, several estimates indicate that we are not on track to achieve the water-related SDGs by 2030. And the impact of the current pandemic has widened the gap even more between what is currently invested and what is needed. It has further exacerbated the pre-existing inequalities. On the one hand, we need to better manage existing finance and attract additional finance. On the other hand, and maybe more importantly, we need to improve water governance. Indeed, in the current context, one thing has become very clear. Public finance alone will not suffice to solve the existing challenges. The achievement of both objectives can be reached faster by making the best use of innovation. Of course, by innovation, I do not mean only technological or technical innovation. I also mean innovation in finance and governance, which is equally important. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends of water, in order to attract additional investors, we need to provide a solid and sound environment. We need strong regulation, strong legislation, strong transparency. We need a change in behavior from all stakeholders. However, and maybe more importantly, we need bold action from the decision makers to initiate a significant change. They set the tone. I have said this many times, and I will say it again. Water is politics. And COVID-19 has allowed us to see the answers that political leaders are capable of implementing in the face of immediate threats to the people. Indeed, hundreds of billions of dollars have been committed to the mitigating the effects of the pandemic, along with policy commitments to build back better. This gives us positive perspectives and opportunities for the future. I'm convinced that thanks to political action combined with innovation, a supportive, enabling environment and well-prepared projects, we can improve water security for millions and billions of people. Ladies and gentlemen, business as usual is not an option if we really want to leave no one behind. Access to safe water and sanitation must be an area that is not subject to cynical decisions or actions. Let us not forget how precious and powerful water is. Water gives life. It improves economies, health, education. It contributes to food and energy security. These benefits are priceless. I deeply believe that it's our shared responsibility to protect water. It's our collective duty to ensure access to the billion of people who need it. Dear friends of water, we know the problems. We even know the solutions. So let us transform them in concrete answers. On the field, let us put our collective efforts towards this goal. International cooperation and collaboration will be crucial to achieve our mission. Latin America has many success stories to share, and I will follow with keen interest the solutions that will be presented today. I wish you all a successful and fruitful conference. I hope that the outcomes from this event will be taken from Latin America to Africa, and I look forward to seeing you all in Dakar 2022. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fujon, for your introduction. And now we give the floor to Julián Suárez Migliosi, Sustainable Development Vice President from CAF. He will give us a keynote speaker about the water. Welcome, Mr. Suárez. The floor is yours. Alejandro, thank you very much. My greetings to all the attendees to this conference, Finance and Governance of Water towards Dakar 2022, Latin America and the Caribbean. Good afternoon, Europe, Africa, Asia, the rest of the world. My greetings to the Executive President, Mr. Granados of CAF, Mr. Fujon from the World Water Council. He has been very inspiring, and I believe that we are ready for a very fruitful conference. Now, let me dive into my presentation. The next slide, please. This is the content of my presentation. I am going to make reference to diagnosis, gaps, water gaps in Latin America and the Caribbean. The president of CAF mentioned, as well as the president of the World Water Council, make reference to the challenges at a global level to provide water supply in quantity and quality. I'm going to make reference to the relationship between water and food systems, that is to say SDG number 6, that seeks to have water and sanitation systems for all the people, and SDG number 2, zero hunger, ensure food security and improving nutrition and improving sustainable agriculture. Then climate and water crisis. The executive president of CAF said that the climate crisis is a water crisis, and therefore to resolve one, we need to address water challenges. And then I will make reference to recovery and resilience, how we come out of the crisis in a more robust manner, a crisis that has affected significantly to Latin America and the Caribbean, and then we are going to talk about water finance and governance. Next slide, please. So when it comes to gaps, as I mentioned earlier, Latin America and the Caribbean is a paradoxal continent. It accounts for 25% of the water resources. However, it has significant hydric stress in cities and production areas with limited access to sanitation and drinking water, and even more restricted wastewater management. So I underscore here what CAF Executive President mentioned, and official data mentioned that despite the efforts done by the region over the past 20 years, we still have 161 million inhabitants in the region do not have safe water, access to safe water. That means 1 out of 4 inhabitants in the region have no drinking water managed in a safe manner, and 17 million do not even have basic access to taps or an improved or enhanced water sources. When it comes to sanitation, the gaps are even more significant, and only 31% of the inhabitants in the region have saved management systems. 7 out of 10 Latin American and Caribbean do not have safe access, and this means more than 430 million people, and 72 million do not even have access to basic sanitation. That means that they pour into latrines or open pits, and some of them do not have even indoor toilets, exposing themselves to health and safety problems. For example, Paraguay, which in economic terms has experienced the highest growth over the past 10 years in the region, particularly during the pandemic. It has not been severely affected in economic terms, and they started the recovery. However, in Paraguay, economic growth observed over the past 10 years, the sanitation coverage is nearly 12%, and they only treat 2% of wastewater. The next slide, please. So, given this context and considering the current pace of investment, from CAF, we believed, as the Executive President mentioned, that we will achieve several goals associated to SDG number 6 by 2045 and 2050. That is to say, long-term achievements when it comes to the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. So we need to significantly increase the flow of investments. But it is also true that we need to better plan the investments. We need investments to be relevant, and we need to operate and maintain in a more effective manner the existing stocks. At CAF, we are putting together a study that will define the water and sanitation investments for the next decades. This report is based on country-specific plans, and the conclusions are preliminary, but we calculate that the annual investments required for wash alone is 0.6% of the GDP of the region. That means that we at least need to increase the current investment flow by 4 times, and the necessary investments account for 3/3 of drinking water and 2/3 of sanitation to achieve SDG 6.1 and 6.3. Good news with regard to this is that there is consensus to increase the pace of the investment substantially. So we need to increase public and private financial flows. Mr. Fujon made reference to this throughout the infrastructure sector.
That is to say, concept, design, pre-investment, implementation, operation of the projects. And the second news is technological disruption. In addition to increasing the investment flow, we need to understand which technological innovations can better bridge the gaps in terms of quality and access, improving the efficiency of the water management when it comes to service provision. The introduction of new technologies is very important to increase the productivity and efficiency of water management, to consider digital and smart management, or for non-drinking water, to better finance financial resources in the sector, to improve the supply in terms of access, or a better and more resilient opportunity against the climate changes. We need to consider the relationship between health, access to water, and food. The water is at the core of sustainable development because it has an impact, direct or indirect, in each of the SDGs that make up the 2030 agenda. Now, there is a clear relationship between SDG 6 and 2, ensuring water availability and sustainable water and sanitation services, and fight against hunger, improve sustainable agriculture, etc. So it's important to analyze this relationship, because today, in order to eradicate poverty and hunger, we need to address the water crisis. So to give you an example, in 2019, hunger affected 46 million of Latin Americans and Caribbeans. By the end of 2020, as a result of the pandemic, this figure reached 60% of the population of the region. And we need to address the triple burden of malnutrition. We see this increasing obesity increase, and a growing overweight and obese population, and micronutrient deficiencies. And water plays a key role. First of all, because water is a true source of nutrition, because it has mineral, including, for example, fluoride, magnesium, calcium, that contribute to an appropriate nutrition. Second, water is primary source of food security, because it provides, by the irrigation of 20% of the global farming area, improve 40% of food production, and that has an impact on farming, on the sustainability of agricultural systems, and of course it has an impact, positive impact, on food security. On the other hand, food habits or eating habits, and we were talking about this in another forum, eating habits on the supply side condition food production, and at the same time they determine the volume of water that is used in the food chain. Rice, maize, soybean, beef production are massive crops and have a high demand for water. According to FAO, 70% of the hydric footprint globally is associated to what we eat. And then producing 1 kilogram of beef, which is the production that requires more liters of water, requires about 15,000 liters of water, or 1 kilogram of rice requires 2,500 to 4,000 liters of water, depending on the type of irrigation. And then waste within the food chain. We need to understand that food waste may account for 30 to 40% post-harvest and the use of food. And as a result of this, there is no appropriate treatment of water bodies, and as a result of that, we contaminate these bodies. So we need to consider water and food in a closely related manner, and we need to find ways that they complement each other to achieve SDG number 6 in order to accomplish the goals of SDG number 2, but understanding the impact in other indicators that are related to environmental sustainability. The next one, when we talk about climate crisis, water crisis, the executive president of CAF mentioned climate crisis equals to water crisis. Climate crisis crisscrosses all the areas, but the impact on water is evident, and it affects the intensity and frequency of rainfall, and therefore the availability and quality of the water. In a new context, the challenge then of having an integrated water management, considering the resilience against climate change, this is increasingly more relevant. The cross-cutting of all green components from the creation of the project. From the very beginning, we need to incorporate definitions of adaptation and mitigation to climate change, which are no longer necessary but are essential. When we talk about recovery and resilience, climate recovery and resilience, as you all know, the pandemic has particularly hit the Latin American and the Caribbean region, both in social and economic terms. This region, which is the most unequal pre-pandemic continent, accounts for 8% of the global population, 13% of greenhouse gases, and it also accounts for 1/3 of mortalities produced as a result of the pandemic. So this region is and has been hardly hit by the pandemic, and is still hit by the pandemic. So we need to prepare a recovery agenda, and this means using more resources in what is immediate and also in the sustainable part, because countries need more resources to improve the capabilities of their water systems. But we need to address long-standing structural problems that are present in the region. That's why investment requires guiding principles aimed at improving the efficiency of the public spending and using the public investment in areas where we do not have appropriate means for private investment. But we need to also put in place innovative mechanisms associated to efficiency. For example, result-based contracts that have proven successful, and some other all over the world, and there are some experiences in the region as well. For example, Savesti in Sao Paulo, and also thinking result-based operations to generate payments in line with the achievement of some landmarks. So we generate the appropriate stimuli for developing capabilities and knowledge transfer. Another important aspect, and we understand multilateral banks play a key role in this area, is combined or the blended finance. This approach requires a restructuring of projects, and we want to use development financing using direct investment, partial guarantee, different types of mechanisms or non-reimbursable support. But are concession resources that may catalyze additional resources from the commercial banking, whether private or public. And as a result of this, we can better address financing needs for a larger number of projects. CAF sees this blended financing as a very promising possibility. It's in its infancy in the water sector. It's being used in agriculture and environment, but as leaders of the task force water finance in the World Water Council, we are putting together this report as mentioned by the president of Mr. Fujon, and basically is based on successful cases from the international experience in the water sector, and that will be readily available from the World Water Council and will be presented at the 9th World Water Forum. Now, let me also mention the need to strengthen the sector's financial resilience to contingent events or contingencies, and therefore we need to create specific reserve funds in order to address future pandemics or disasters. That is a very relevant initiative, a key variable to move towards the SDG goals and the national, determined national contributions. We need to have design studies that accelerate the cycle of projects and improving the quality of the projects. And from multilateral institutions, we understand that we have the opportunity to contribute to the creation of better projects by pre-investing, as CAF has been doing since 2018. Using, for example, pre-investment studies, CAF PTS, and account for $5 million per year for non-refundable sources, approximately 20 million that have contributed to the pre-investment of 18 pre-investment studies for water and sanitation in the region. And also, after COP26, where CAF had a key role, CAF will become, in the next 5 years, in the Latin American and Caribbean Green Bank, and we will double our climate and environment funding by 2026 by making 25 billion direct investments in order to help national and international contribution of shareholder countries when we talk about environmental and climate projects. When we talk about supporting development countries,
agreements achieved in COP26 are a great opportunity to strengthen the need to increase investment flows to the water system, including measures for circular economy and environmental and on an environmental focus, which is not only environmentally friendly, but in many cases more cost-effective. Let's go to the next slide. In terms of recovery and resilience, when we talk about climate crisis, we are talking about the need of an overall governance of the water resource. Many voices consider this version 2.0. This is the basis for a timely governance of water with institutions that can legitimize the management of water resources. This requires, in some cases, adjustment of regulatory lines and accountability, and this is what governance is about. Water governance is about generating a balance on the growing demands on the use of water and the response of decision-making parties. Especially important is that regulatory bodies and service providers follow good practice of corporate governance, taking care of efficacy, legitimacy, and going back to the most evident link between water, food, and energy, I would add here, we need to build intersector and multi-level articulation areas to increase synergies. Now, I will conclude here stating that given the relationship of water with the different dimensions of development, it is important to state that water is at the core of sustainable development. This is what we understand in CAF. And for the future, given the corporate current situation idea to collaborate, we will be more present in this agenda. We are committed to the region and the population and the biodiversity around us. Thank you very much to all of you. I will conclude here, and I hope the conference is fruitful to all the participants. Thank you very much, Alejandro. Thank you, Mr. Suarez, for this conference that helps as a context for the debates we will hold in this event. We have the contribution of the leaders of water in Latin America and the Caribbean. Representatives of government, authorities, delegates, and colleagues. On behalf of the government of Ecuador, thank you to CAF for the invitation to participate in the finance and governance of water in Latin America and the Caribbean, a space leading to guarantee the human right of access to water. Water is the natural right that should be used in harmony, integrating communities, social, environmental, cultural, economic, and even political aspects. In this context, we have defined the national strategy of water quality to improve and protect all the water resources, ecosystems, quality of people's living condition, water security and control, and surveillance of all contaminants of natural resources at national level. Finally, I'm glad to reiterate the commitment of Ecuador and this government on integrated governance of water resources, promoting the establishment and development of water basin committees to act on developing, assessing, controlling water resources in the different water basins in the region. Thank you to all the attendees on the water management of water. Water unites us. It is a pleasure to greet you from Paraguay, from the Ministry of Public Works and Communications. Thank you to CAF for organizing the conference on finance and governance of water in Latin America and the Caribbean towards Dakar 2022. It's a pleasure to greet you. The drinking water and sanitation subject is part of our responsibility in the ministry in Paraguay, and the main challenges in the country on the matter are related to achieving a proper governance of the sector, where both public institutions and around 5,500 community water providers are present. We want to increase the coverage of sewage and effluent treatment system and incorporate the existing water systems in the country, improve the continuity of service, associating supply providers for a better economy. We need financial resources to achieve these objectives, and work designs include robust structures to answer to climate change. What are the plans and actions Paraguay is undertaking to achieve the SDG number 6? Execution of sanitation waters that already have financed. We have achieved several of them, obtaining resources through multilateral organization lending or private lending through the different legislation we have in the country to achieve 2030 goals based on our planning. We have created the SDG committee, providing or monitoring the achievements. And we also have a drinking water and sanitation plan incorporating the criteria aligned with SDGs. Warm greeting to all the participants and the best of success in your work. After this brilliant opening, we start the program of the Congress, Finance and Water Governance in Latin America and the Caribbean towards Dakar 2022. Even though many efforts have been made to achieve water safety, millions do not have access to safe water. 17 million of them do not even basic access to tap or improved water source. People do not have access to sanitation, exposing health and security problems. Based on this information, there is an agreement on the need to streamline investments substantially, requiring the improvement, optimization of public and private investment flows. In this first day, we will talk about finance to water sector within the framework of achieving SDGs, not leaving anyone behind. We will then go to the first panel, focus on the regulatory and law view. We have Jorge Concha, Director of Analysis and Technical Assessment of Sustainable Development of CAF. Mr. Concha, welcome. You have the floor. Thank you very much, Alejandro. Good morning to all of you. It is a great pleasure to start with this first panel to kick off the exchange of ideas, views, and of course, debate, discussions on the matter of the conference. Julian Suarez mentioned that with the current rate of investment, we might only achieve global services by mid this century. And this is connected to finance flows still insufficient. We wonder, how can we improve these financing flows? We know that there is a commitment, a political, institutional commitment to achieve this universalization, not to leave anyone behind. And we could see this clearly through the messages conveyed by the different authorities a few minutes ago. But it's necessary that those institutional political views translate into regulation that can generate incentives and framework necessary to achieve these goals that are closely related to the human right to water. Following this, I have an excellent panel to address this issue, which will help us dwell into this regulatory and legal view. We have Juan Pablo Letelier, President of the Andean Parliament, also Soledad García Muñoz, a solicitor specialized in human rights and special rapporteur on economic, social, cultural, and environmental rights of the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights of the American States Organization, and Oscar Pintos, expert in regulation and also president of the Association of Drinking Water and Sanitation Regulatory Bodies of the Americas. Let me thank you, Juan Pablo, Soledad, and Oscar, for their interest to participate in this panel. We understand the effort involved. We know about your tight agendas. And let me thank you first for your availability. I'd also like to mention to all of you, the viewers, that the events website has detailed information on each of the panels joining us in all the sessions, the panels of the Congress. Let me start with the first round of questions, starting with a common question to all of you based on the supranational view that you share, that you three share. Particularly, I would like to ask you on what do you think are the main actions and decisions required in the region to achieve consensus, necessary agreement among the countries, but also within the countries to foster this need of increased financing, requiring coordination and cooperation not only among water institutions, but also water institutions and financial institutions, economic decisions, and within each country's government. Let me start with Juan Pablo. Juan Pablo, how to achieve this consensus from the Andean Parliament? You're a specialist on achieving these agreements to increase financing, especially post-pandemic context where the financing of the region is committed. First of all, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you to CAF and all of you helping on this battle on the SDG 6 and its relationship with others, which I think was perfectly defined in the presentation. This is a complex debate. Whoever thinks it's simple is wrong. Let's remember that the drinking water, the use of drinking water mostly is used to produce food, not only for direct consumption, fresh water. We have an important challenge because the consumption, human consumption is only part of it in water management. Another element here we should consider is climate change or water stress. We need to manage these resources more rapidly and with more responsibility when technology is available. Now, having said this, and also stating that we need an open attitude for this debate, there are different experiences in our country. And something evident is that we need to know first what are the public institutions to manage water resources for human consumption and everything involved. Public institutions are essential. Second, what are the organizations in charge of this to ensure efficiency, transparency in management? Second, what will be the public policies that will allow rates management? If we're going to talk about access to water, the perspective of consumers and citizens, the state should guarantee, would the state guarantee this access to water for human consumption? Also, institutions should guarantee, whether it's from the state or multilateral organizations, private financing should be efficient without losing a principle, losing sight of an important principle, investing in the production of this public asset, water. Whatever the funds come from, they should be properly invested, and there shouldn't be a profit taken from this basic resource. These under proper rates are the main challenges. Let me share with you an experience from Chile. We made a difficult decision in the 90s. We made a decision to incorporate private capital. There are more than 74 water and production and treatment of different sizes in the country. As a result of this decision that was made, given the need and the lack of water quality, water coverage in urban areas and treatment of water, a great investment was made, private capital investment. Some say water was privatized, some that it is under concessions, but the water resources is a public asset, and by shortening terms, given that public finance had no capacity, precisely because of the urgency, we decided on a model. That's not the only model. There are many other models, but we have to understand that all our countries implemented different models, but we need common principles. Today in Chile, because of the decision made, has full coverage of drinking water in urban areas, 97% of wastewater system coverage, and drinking water in rural areas, where multilateral organizations have been key establishing this model back then. It is very important to have public institutions that are serious, with a regulatory body that is firm. We need a rate policy that is clear to ensure investments. And the third element, I would say third and fourth, it's clear that to guarantee access to water, some would say social, other subsidy policies should be implemented. In Chile, we have a scheme to subsidize households without sufficient resources to access to minimum assets the state should guarantee to human beings. There are different parameters. Some would say 40 liters. Others would say that is 100 liters. It doesn't matter the characteristic of the parameter, but the state should guarantee whoever doesn't have the resources to ensure this, once infrastructure is there, and quality provision, efficiency in the provision, and also within political rate efficiency, future investments can be made, maintaining investments, because we've seen in different countries have abandoned maintenance, generated important gaps. We need social subsidy policy to ensure access to these basic human rights. It's not enough to state it. We need public policies to finance.
These are the three key pillars to make our work efficient in each of our countries. And let me conclude by saying ideologize the debate. And this is difficult because the water resource is at the core due to the climate crisis, as the water resource is at the core due to its productive use, and agribusiness at some time and agribusiness sometimes use more against household farming. So it's very difficult not to make this discussion or debate political, but we need to enter into an agreement to ensure water production, diffusion, water treatment, and to make water affordable for everyone. And based on this experience, we need to understand that water is a human right that should be the most important thing. And as such, the state must guarantee access to the different funding resources. That is what we must do, because water is a human resource and we cannot wait until 2050 to accomplish this human right. Thank you, Juan Pablo. I think this helps me to move to Soledad, because it's not enough to claim the right to access to water. We need to have public policies in place in order to ensure that access. And Soledad, let me ask you, from as an observer and advocate for human rights within the OAS, how can we generate these agreements to ensure and increase the finance of water? Well, thank you very much, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon to everybody. First of all, my greetings and thanks, and commend this forum that is so relevant for the region and for the human rights and their populations and the groups that are more vulnerable or are more discriminated. An international funding institution like CAF, it's very important to consider the rights perspective that is placed in this forum. And I thank you for sharing, for inviting me to share this outlook. I am the special rapporteur in this commission created by the Commission to protect all economic, social, cultural, and environmental rights in the Americas, and that means integrated agenda: water, sanitation, health, food, housing, work, the environment. So my mandate has as a priority the clarification of the standards and recommendations of all OAS members, and focusing to water as a human right, because the crisis, we call it an emergency, climate emergency, and the sanitation crisis are human rights crisis, and water as a human right. When we talk about 161 million people with no access to water in the region, affordable water, we are talking about people that are not enjoying their human rights that are internationally recognized and that have been left behind. That's why we call upon recognizing water as an economic, social, cultural, and environmental right that is tied to sanitation. These are twin rights, and they are indivisible as all the other human rights, and these calls for an interdependence and indivisible approach. And also the indivisibility of climate change has to be considered as an integral approach, considering water as a right. So in this regard, I share what the senator has mentioned, and President of the Andean Parliament, about the need to de-ideologize the water debate and human rights debate, because we are talking about dignity and the protection of the common house, that is to say, the planet. So I'm glad to see that CAF also has this interconnected and comprehensive view when it comes to access to water as a human right. Excuse me. And this rights approach calls for public policies, including the materialization of resources to implement those policies. So another priority under my mandate is the development of public policy so that states can comply with international agreements that have been agreed by or accepted by each country under their constitutions. So one of the key obligations is for states to make available all possible resources to the materialization of human rights, and they must also comply with all the international agreements based on progressivity and non-progressivity principles. This is very difficult in this sanitation and global crisis, and we need transparency, efficiency when it comes to public spending. That's why we are developing different principles on fiscal policies and human rights that can be applied to different topics. I'm not going to delve into this now because we are running short of time, but I believe that they can be an interesting tool for Dakar 2022. The discussion about access to water as a human right and as other type of human right has to do with sovereign commitments by the states and also commitments agreed by the international institutions. And it's also about commitments, as we mentioned, for the materialization of the 2030 agenda on sustainable development. And these are commitments that have to do with democratic stability. We consider from Redesca and the Commission that many of the regional conflict, because different communities or marginalized communities don't have access to fresh water, we need to meet the human right to water, and we need to invest in social peace, and we need to consider the gender perspective, non-discrimination policy in order to finance this. If a person doesn't have access to water, for example, that is different, or if it's an indigenous people, if it's a woman, if it's a rural person, and the intersectionality approach is also at the core, so that the measures and funding have this right perspective. Comprehensive health also, as we have seen in the pandemic, is very important. So materializing the water right as a human right is a way to fighting inequality and poverty in the region, which is the most unequal region in the world, where there are, we see poverty, extreme poverty that across all the states in the region. Let me highlight that within the pandemic and this integrated response from the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, there are different commissions that consider the right to water as a human right, which is a social determining factor to health, and Resolution 1/2020 and the press release that we have called all states since 2018 to act on promoting the right to water, recognizing water as a human right within their regulatory frameworks, having appropriate strategies and goals that allow for the accomplishment of all the contents, because these tools contribute and make this discussion more valuable. I apologize, but I have a bad cold. Well, thank you, Soledad. These seasonal changes affect our health. That's very clear. Many of us are listening to you and are facing similar health conditions. Now, let me now move to and wrap up this first round with Oscar. Soledad was mentioning this need to have a dialogue between the different sectors and the economic sectors, having fiscal policies in dialogue with the sector policies. And as a regulator, probably the common language in the different economic and sectors, how do you envision this possibility of increasing the necessary funding for promoting this dialogue? Good morning, Jorge. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure and honor to participate in this CAF forum. It's a very timely session when we talk about water finance and governance. So, from ADERASA, which is the Association of Water and Sanitation Regulatory Agencies in Latin America, we have a participation that is evident in different documents and policies. But I share a concern also raised by my prior speakers, and that it has to do with how we can, well, given the current diagnosis and situation, how can we achieve the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, particularly SDG number 6. So, in general, the international community has expressed an aspiration of setting a horizon for all the governments and communities, and in order to improve the quality of the people and the health of the people in the planet. This has been very important, and as a horizon is far away, so we need to make necessary steps to get closer to that horizon. And SDG 6, well, it's clear that the financing is a key component. The amounts required to achieve the goals are very, very high. And assuming that we have them as a silver bullet solution, but we would need some changes in our adaptation and governance systems. When we talk about the current diagnosis, it is clear that in SDG 6, we are not in the right way to accomplish it by 2030. And that is a problem that has different perspectives. One is the allocation of resources in each country and generate or funding scarcity and or funding which is not enough to accomplish these goals and targets. The other approach or the other dimension, which is very important, is the governance of the sector. What do we mean by this? Is institutional weakness, not only in the water sector. Latin America is known for not having full-blown institutions. Some are better than others, and some are weaker, and as a result of this weakness, they cannot achieve goals, particularly in the water sector that includes different stakeholders with different interests. So what we can say is that a good governance would allow us to use the available resources in an efficient manner, because as I mentioned before, if, for example, if we could have all the resources required to ensure water access and sanitation by 2030, I'm sure that we wouldn't be able to hit that target, because we are falling short of governance, having clear rules, having arrange or to work in a synergetic manner. So governance would be the key, opening the gate for funds to reach infrastructure works and improvement operation works. It's not just about resources, but good governance as well. And the pandemic, COVID-19, showed the structural deficiencies in the region that had short-term and long-term consequences. Short-term consequences, and this basically refer to the difficulties that we are currently facing in this post-pandemic area. During the pandemic, there was a recession of economic activities. Therefore, the population had problems in going to work, having means to pay different rates. As a result of this, different governments suspended payments due to default on rate payment. And this has been recognized by some countries in their constitutions. So the providers suffered a reduction in their profits. And as a result of this, the regulatory entities in the different countries agreed on changing budgetary items to address operational expenses, because production profits were dramatically reduced in some countries. So investment items, for example, different license agreements, were transferred to meet operational expenses. And then the long-term difficulties, and that reallocation of funds will require a redefinition of goals and objectives, because funds have been allocated to different purposes. As a result of these, the states will have to generate new resources, either directly or indirectly. And
to clearly analyze the matter, we need, specifically among countries and at regional level, establish the priority of universality of resources with budgetary items. There are many interest claims, but it's not materialized on programs. So the regulatory body should commit itself not only as a right, human rights of access to water, but the regulatory body has the power of regulation of the state, not the countries. So it should not only be involved in the areas where service is available, the natural scope of work, but also should look for solutions where the service is not available. And in Latin America has a particular problem. It is the region in the world with largest urban development. The migration of rural areas to the city generates particular phenomena that generates peripheral areas in great cities without basic access, such as access to water. So the regulatory body should participate and establish how to solve these situations to achieve the universalization of the human right in the agenda established, meeting the agenda established. And we also need to find the best practices in our countries into a common experience to be made the best by all. And we should therefore achieve the SDG number 6, which we all expect to achieve, but we still think hard to meet. Thank you very much, Oscar, for being here in this panel and your presentation on how finance has a bidirectional relationship with governance. We still have a few minutes left. I would like to cover a second round of questions, but I would ask your collaboration to get to brief answers so that we can move on to the coming panels. I would say around 2-3 minutes per answer. I'd like to go into specific issues now. Now, starting again with Juan Pablo, we know that for the last 10 years in the Andean Parliament, managing or dealing with the integrated management of water resources, there have been great progress. So from the Andean Parliament, we see you are developing an Andean strategy of water safety with a more holistic approach. I would like to ask you, Juan Pablo, what are the economic and financial aspects of this Andean strategy of water safety, and what are the provisions you consider to gather further investment that could be duplicated in other subregions? Thank you. Now going to the matter. We have a regulatory framework on water management. It is important that foreign affairs ministers dare to continue doing things as they have. We need to do things different to achieve goals, and this requires political decision, even though it might be uncomfortable. And I think we need to assume that even we have to make people uncomfortable to achieve our goals of correct, proper water management to achieve access. We need to open the debate of financing. CAF is could no doubt be our main pillars to reach the countries with financing problems. We cannot talk about Andean integration if we don't use our institutions fully. We should all in Latin America be proud of CAF today, starting from a specific type of project, and has become one of the most important development banks in the region, with a specific calling on the integration of matters. So we need to call our governments to give CAF a main role on financing to achieve this goal. And on the political aspects, we need to finish with the idea that this can only be managed by the state. In some countries, that might be the case, but not in all. We need to assume politically the importance of public-private partnership for financing, to generate governance on the public sector with clear statement, public policies guaranteeing rates management and access to the resource. We should value and assume that the states on themselves will not be able to finance this goal in the short term, and this should be urgently achieved given the interrelationship with health and the environment. We therefore need to establish a new alliance, a new partnership. This is what we are discussing in the Andean Parliament. Governments should dare, and in this I will insist in a last a concept which is not very popular in the world of politics. We should leave ideology behind and advance on institutional governance lines that will produce in the next 40, 50 years. We need to talk about politics in big, and in water generation, we need to make this a state policy. Thank you very much, Juan Pablo, for this call to produce public policies in big. In this opportunity, I would like to ask Soledad, precisely from Redesca, how do you see the possibility to implement this human right of access to water, to how to focus on the most vulnerable populations that have been left aside? Thank you very much for your question. I hope my voice helps me to respond this as it's required. The human right to water is at the core of Redesca's mandate and the Commission of civil society participation and help to these groups that historically been discriminated against. The work on theme subject hearings, reports on tools for our monitoring action, how we see the situation of access to water in those groups. The human rights report in the Panasonia shows the impact of human rights of access to water by indigenous people in the region. This report is very important as an input for this debate. I would also like to mention the request mechanism of the Commission within the framework of cases and requests that could get to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. There had also been important developments in human rights access to water, which improve the protection of especially vulnerable groups. We have a particular case in the Inter-American Court of Human Rights protecting the rights of indigenous people in Argentina, the case of Allocation, where for the first time our land in English, the court punishes a state on human rights of access to water as an autonomous right together with food and environment, framed under the Costa Rica agreement. The court, through the Statement 23, establishes and continues to develop through our mechanisms. I would also like to refer to the importance of the provisional measures on issues related to this and human rights to water. Through the right to health and life has been considered by the Commission or protected by the Commission, and this is related to the approach we have addressed in Redesca, so that the Commission integrates in its protection mission. We have provisional measures where the Commission has protected children and teenagers in indigenous community or pregnant and breastfeeding women to make decisions or take measures so that the community can have access to fresh water for the life of teenagers, children, breastfeeding and pregnant women. ensuring the protection of the access to water through rivers, of farming, indigenous farming groups affected by oil companies. This is also part of all the states that make up our organization of the OAS. That's why it's very important, I think, to insist on the need to address the right approach. I would also like to mention a report that we created, standards on human rights, to address not only governance but also financing of human right to water, the role of the private sector, the role of companies, and the obligations of states on the matter. Our report, published in 2019, addresses or brings a view developed in the United Nations under the guiding principles of human rights, exceeding this to accept a paradigm of companies and human rights as one of the contexts which we identified, especially concerning in the region on essential public utilities to guarantee human rights and privatization context. Clearly, we see the right to water is involved. I would like to especially call your attention on this report, and to conclude, I'd also like to mention to soon develop a regional report on the matter, bringing light on the impact on human rights, particularly right to water of disadvantaged communities. This is a claim of civil society and different states of the region. So hopefully we can have your support on those efforts, and of course you have the support of Redesco to continue with this job.
Thank you, Soledad. Really key issues for the most vulnerable populations in the region. We are just about to wrap up, but let me give the floor to Oscar, and the question also connected to the activity from Aderasa that you've been working for the past 20 years in the region. So you have been able to identify challenges, problems, and also the different possibilities to improve the governance. Oscar, which are the incentives in order to promote nature-based solutions? We talked a little bit all today to have more environmentally friendly solutions that tap into the natural capital. How can we increase the funds to promote these nature-based solutions? Just 2-3 minutes and we will then wrap up. Very, very quickly, because I know we are running short of time. I think that the challenges have to do with the institutionality. The fluctuations of the administrations in the countries have been a drawback to achieve the objectives. And when we talk about we see the lack of clear rules in the sector, and this is happening now, and it happened in the past, and this must come from policy makers. As a result of this, we have a poor governance. So for any kind of investment or to attract capital investments towards the sector, we need to have clear rules that arrange the different stakeholders and provide for forceability. We need to have state policies. for the sector and for the attraction of investments. And secondly, from the sector, in this case from the regulatory sector in the region, we need to improve national baselines for achieving SDG number 6. Why? Because it's difficult to improve what we don't know. If we can't measure the progress, we will hardly be able to know if we are on the right path or not. But I believe that each country should have its own statistics and data. Third, resource allocation, and we need to improve the efficiency in resource allocation, both from the supply and demand side. 22% of the subsidies, according to a global report, is received by the richest sector of the population, and the remaining 20% to the poorest. So this shows something which is not correct. And then we talk about innovation, not only technological innovation, but we need to consider dramatic change both of the regulatory agencies and of the leading agents. We need to address non-traditional solutions for sanitation. The investment levels to have connections in the network, it's something that we will not accomplish because first it is very costly, and secondly we need governance levels that don't exist in the region. But non-traditional solutions that come from the academia or the private sector should be incorporated. One, for example, is septic tank installation where, for example, traditional networks don't reach. And therefore, the regulatory agents should also be involved in these activities in order to regulate these activities and offer them as a service, and then provide some incentives to the operators, procedural or technological incentives. And the academia and the private investment and innovation plays a key role in order to adapt the solutions to each country. And finally, nature-based solutions in the region has been one of the pillars that allowed to make some headway in some lagging behind sectors. For example, the rate of environmental and water rates. It's an holistical approach that makes reference to circular economy and considers water is part of our closed system, and whatever we implement for payment of rates, the rates allow to take action, improving the environment and try to improve climate change conditions. So the challenge is significant. There is a lot of things that we have to do, but having clear rules for financing will help understanding the new operation services, but also the inclusion or the incorporation of technologies. Thank you, Oscar. And we close the panel. And very briefly, let me highlight at least 3 ideas that have been present throughout. Institutions and funding are closely knitted concepts. This is, of course, the topic of the conference, and it is the approach of the regulatory agencies and of lawmakers. Secondly, the region requires policies to improve financing by bringing new stakeholders, new mechanisms, new ideas, and a better use of nature. Thirdly, in order to consider water and sanitation as a human right, we need to include the most vulnerable populations, which is essential. So thank you, Juan Pablo, Oscar, Soledad, for your participation in this panel, and I give the floor back to Alejandro. Thank you, Jorge, Concha, for your moderation. Thank you, panel members, Juan Pablo Lepellier, Garcia Munoz, and Oscar Pintos, for your excellent presentations about the regulatory and law-making regulations vis-a-vis the challenges posed by SDGs.
Trinidad and Tobago is not a water-scarce country by international standards. Despite the availability of ground and surface water due to our relatively high rate of rainfall per annum, a large segment of our population is not benefiting from an adequate and reliable water supply. This, coupled with the fact that small pockets of our communities and population are not connected to a sanitary wastewater system, it paints a picture of a water sector in dire need of transformation. This process, which is already underway, is based on 3 strategic pillars. 1, the restructuring of the Water and Sewerage Authority. Number 2, the optimization of the water and wastewater networks and performance. And 3, the expansion of water supply and water sources. In support of the transformation, 2 major projects are currently being rolled out across Trinidad and Tobago that are meant to improve the water supply to all our communities. 1, the Community Water Improvement Program, which addresses shortfalls within communities receiving water less than 24 hours, 2 days per week. And 2, the National Water Stabilization and Improvement Program, which comprises high-priority strategic investments in the water infrastructure and associated operational systems. Already, 100,000 citizens have positively been impacted, bringing us closer to our country's realization of our strategic developmental goals in the water and sanitation sector.
Es un gusto para el Ministerio de Ambiente de Uruguay participar de esta conferencia organizada por CAF preparatoria de lo que será el foro.
It's my pleasure to participate from Uruguay in this CAF. We play a key role in this ministry, and from quality, quantity, and water management as a country. In terms of quality, we are optimizing controls to ensure water supply, and in terms of quantity, we are undergoing an ambitious project providing drinking water for the metropolitan area and the city of Montevideo. The other pillar has to do with sanitation. Half of the country, of the provinces in Uruguay, have no access to sanitation, and we have 2 very ambitious projects, one for more than 2,000 inhabitants and one for less than 2,000 inhabitants, to try to address this problem, which is an inequality problem, because the city of Montevideo has a high level of connections, but it implies a human development and public health problem. So this type of conferences where we consider or have the possibility of having funding mechanisms is very important for Uruguay. We wish you the best, and we are readily available for any query that you may have. So we come to the end to this first block or panel of water funding and sanitation. We move now to the second panel, the view of different finances and water suppliers. The moderator is Gustavo Saltier, global leader of water and sanitation of global water practice from the World Bank. Welcome, Mr. Saltier. Welcome. Thank you, Alejandro. Good morning, everybody. welcome to this panel on water funding and sanitation, so we leave no one behind. And this is the view of different financiers and suppliers. SDG number 6. I would like to thank CAF for inviting me to moderate this distinguished panel. First of all, Carles Puente, Director of Banobras, which is the development bank in Mexico, with more than 25 years of experience in infrastructure, public-private investment, etc. Gonzalo Meschengerser, International Relations Director of ISA, which is the water supplier of water system of Buenos Aires, and also the director of ALOAS. ISA is the second largest and fifth largest water supply and sanitation water, and Luis Velasco, president of CLOXA, Latin American Confederation of Water and Sanitation Community Organizations. It plays a key role to promote access to water and sanitation to more than 70 million people that have no access in rural areas. And this is done through community networks or associations. We know that achieving universal access to sustainable water and sanitation services is a challenge for different reasons. However, in many countries in the region and in developing countries, water and sanitation suppliers do not work in appropriate environment to provide sustainable and quality services from an environmental, financial, and social environment. In order to achieve SDG 6, that ensures water availability and sustainable development of water and sanitation is a major challenge. The technical and traditional approaches in the sector are not appropriate. Actually, as it was mentioned by the previous panel, today we are not ready to ensure that the region will accomplish SDG number 6. We need to change. We need to make changes in order for countries to make headway towards accomplishing this goal. And this calls for changes, considering regulatory policy and other aspects in an integrated manner. The panel members represent different sectors, and their thoughts will provide us with different insights that will help to modify the sector synergies. So let me ask panel members the following questions. Please don't take more than 5 minutes. And my first question to Carlos Puentes. Banobras is a leading institution, a development bank in Mexico. It has attracted World Bank, IDB funds, and Mexican funds for the sector. Banobras finance different structures using different innovative funding sectors, expanding the inclusion of the private sector. Banobras has been key in turnkey projects for water treatment plants and sanitation, for example.
Well, I'd like to ask you how you've been working to promote increased financing in the water sector in Mexico, and along these lines, whether the turnkey type of projects have had blended financing, catalyzing the loans from different stakeholders, and whether you can mention the efficiency of this type of projects. Carlos, you have the floor. Thank you very much. We can hear you perfectly, Carlos. You're muted. Okay, thank you. I will answer the questions one by one. The first one, I'm going to focus on how Banobras have been working on promoting financing to promote water access in Mexico. Banobras has funded the first fund for infrastructure created in the early 90s to promote private investment in water and sanitation. The program fostered by the collectively to promote projects in water with more than 73 cubic meters of flow. The program has been successful in promoting drinking water supply projects, as Gustavo mentioned, and projects of wastewater treatment plants created explicitly to contribute to improve efficiency of water providers in the financial and operating systems. But we haven't promoted this thrust to financial and operational sustainability of these organizations. Banobras and Fonadin, with the evolution of FINFRA, the fund to the national fund, has provided more than $120 million in concessions, financing, subsidies, generating over $1 billion in investments. Promagua does not only finance investment sources in the projects, but also the development of feasibility studies so that the projects can go from initial consumption, where we work together with service providers, water institutions and municipalities in developing the projects, to the final financial conclusion. Currently, in blended finance in BOTs, I can show you very quickly a slide to explain better the way we work. Can you see the screen? Yes, Carlos, thank you. Basically, the scheme promoted by Banobras and Fonadin to develop projects through blended financing includes public-private partnership through specific purpose company and a trust channeling all the sources of the project. The main element in developing financing was guaranteeing the flows of public promoters, so operating institutions, states and governments, through payment guarantee by hiring or getting contingency credit lines and affecting the flows that go to the municipalities and governments through fiscal income or revenues transfer from the state. Finally, to refer to the role of efficiency in these type of projects, since the previous government and this government, the current government, we have focused Banobras' efforts looking for schemes that promote the efficiency of operating institutions. First, because the guarantee scheme through marginal tax revenues is running out. Municipalities and governments are having less tax incomes, so we need to generate new projects so that the water operating institutions can self-finance. We have Los Cabos, the first project achieving service provision agreement based on performance, based on blended finance. What part is provided by Fonadin and the other part through public institution as payment. But we should consider capital capex as service provider, and the credit through financial institutions, which could be Banobras or commercial banking sector in Mexico, or bilateral and multilateral financial organizations like CAF, the World Bank, or the Inter-American Development Bank. And I hope we can provide further to the debate later. Carlos, thank you very much. I think what you have established, in addition to describing the role of the different institutions, it's extremely important for this debate, because what you are expressing is how to adjust investment policies to the fiscal situation of the country, which is not exclusively a situation that happens in Mexico, but as a response to pandemic, as a result of the pandemic, governments have less resources. So you have highlighted how Banobras is adjusting to this new reality, looking for self-financing schemes in water companies, posing a different debate, opening the door to invite Gonzalo Meschengiesen from ISA to tell all the participants. ISA is a public utility concessionary company for water service provision and treatment for the city of Buenos Aires and the outskirts of Buenos Aires, with its own characteristics as other big, large cities in the region, concentrating the economic development with credits from different organizations. So the question, Mr. Messengesher, what are the financial challenges of ISA in the coming years, and following this, how the company plans to fund its projects to meet universal access to water and sanitation? Thank you, Gustavo, for the invitation. I would like to convey the appreciation from the president of the company, who hasn't been able to be here. She's committed to join CAF towards Dakar 2022 and celebrates the decision by the CAF to become the green bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, and is committed as a president of one of the largest water company in the region and the world to join you on this path. As funding in ISA, we have the POMM, the Maintenance Improvement Operation Fund, establishing universal coverage for 2030. This means that we need to achieve in the next 8 years the inclusion of 830 million people in water distribution and 5,800,000 to the sewage and sanitation system. ISA needs $6.2 billion investment in the first case and $10 billion investment in sewage and sanitation systems. Prorating this investment in 8-10 years, this would bring a figure that shows the need to be creative and increase funding sources. We're talking about $2 billion a year. In terms of the support by the national government, 90% of the shares are in the hands of the national state. We have achieved a record of 130 billion pesos annual budget, establishing the expectations on the progress of the works already on track. Our president has requested the board and the professional team in ISA to be creative when looking for financing, not only depending on the national treasury and the bilateral organizations like the CAF or World Bank, but also consider alternatives. One of the paths that the company has been exploring is achieving financing sources for the fine network so that our users can connect to trunk networks for water and sanitation. We consider that a neighbor in a popular neighborhood would take 2-3 years to connect to the water system and more to the sanitation system. So one of the ways to streamline this process to access water and sanitation is to get resources for households. This one has been one of the alternative paths I consider. The other one is an export project, ISA to the world, which we have started this year, expanding knowledge and human capital of ISA connected to infrastructure planning and getting resources to fund investments and works. As to improving efficiency of the company, an essential aspect to make investments profitable, the company is strongly working on energy efficiency, using sludges. ISA would go from 10,000 to 50,000 tons production of sludges, working with intelligent pumping. In ISA, we have uninterrupted water supply, drinking water supply, and therefore our pumping systems sometimes work full operation 24 hours a day without considering demand. So we are trying to streamline our pumping system to accompany the demand. Another issue ISA is working on for investments is working on leakages, implementing satellite imaging, leakage detection, the rumor of echoes, inspections on distribution systems with an ambitious program to update pipes that are becoming obsolete. Finally, before concluding, I would also like to mention that ISA has had experience in financial markets that has not been very positive for the company, and this is one of the paths the board has decided to conclude. I would also like to express again the appreciation to Julian Suarez Mediosi, the president of CAF, and the president of the WWC. Thank you very much, Gustavo. Thank you, Gonzalo, for this summary on innovation by ISA. This is extremely important and an example for other water providers. somehow you highlight the issue of energy efficiency, intelligent pumping systems, and innovation on leakage reduction, which is extremely important for climate change. We know it is an important agenda for Argentina, but this is extremely relevant for water and sanitation providers, because it's an important source of financing for climate change. There's financing in emissions reduction and what you're doing with leakage reduction. And thank you very much for your presentation.
El señor Luis de Cloxas, y sabemos que
Cloxas. We know that Cloxas gathers members of 15 countries that include 145,000 rural water and sanitation community organizations. The question is, what is the role of Cloxas as a regional organizations to improve sustainability of community organizations? Because many of these community organizations face funding restrictions to improve the coverage or improve water services. And what would be the role of regional, local, and national authorities vis-a-vis these community organizations? And can you provide us some guidelines about what is the current situation in Colombia? Thank you. Thank you. First of all, my thanks on behalf of Cloxas for inviting us, and my greetings to all attendees. Cloxas promotes and strengthens incidence capability of Latin American and Caribbean community organizations through innovative solidarity and transparent communities to have access to sustainable water and sanitation. Now, with regard to restrictions to finance, Cloxas and its members work hand on hand with different governments and other organizations to have political incidence for the implementation of policies and public programs, so as to build or accommodate the regulatory frameworks to allow Cloxas to access to finance and soft and hard technologies. Cloxas makes reference to all water and sanitation community organizations, regardless of the name given in each of the countries. So, although we are more visible and some recognition by some different governments as regards the contribution made by these community organizations, we still face many challenges, particularly the departments of the treasuries. Local, national, regional authorities must understand that community water and sanitation organization is the best stakeholder to provide access to water and sanitation, because it's in rural areas where we see the major gaps and where other stakeholders would have some difficulties in providing sustainable solutions. That's why national, regional, and local communities must provide funds for infrastructure and strengthen community governments so that the communities manage and maintain the systems through delegation or in partnerships between the public sector and the community sector. And many say that the rural water and sanitation sector is overrated. But today we don't know how many OXAs are in the region. And if we want to have some control indicators, we must, or at least we need to have a reliable baseline. In Colombia, for example, government organizations consider that there are approximately 16,000 OXAs, but there are many many difficulties due to the topography and other situations, have a supply system. And as a result of these, we don't have clear information. But the 2018 census showed that we have different paved streets. And when we talk about governability, for the last 2 years, the Housing Ministry, which is the guiding authority in the country for water and sanitation supply, opened up a dialogue with the community water organizations. They invite different state stakeholders and ministries to design policies and solutions for this sector. However, the progress with the ministry or the Department of the Treasury are not significant. We need to continue working together, as mentioned by my other panel members. This is a major challenge, and we hope that we can revert this all together. Thank you. Thank you, Luis, for your insights and the information about Colombia with regard to these more than 16,000 oxes, and the lack of baseline information is very important. This is very important. Oscar Pintos mentioned this in the previous panel. What we can do without information. Colombia is a pioneer in the region, like Peru, for the implementation of regulatory frameworks in order to start working with these community service organizations. But it's a major challenge. And also the challenge that you mentioned with regard to the ministries of the Treasury or Economy. So we wrap up this first round of questions. The second round of questions, we are a little bit behind because we opened the panel later than scheduled. So I would very much appreciate if you can reduce the length of your questions. Now we would like to see what you think about the role of different international organizations, different ways of participation. So Carlos, as co-chair of the Water Finance Coalition, which is an initiative led by CAF and the Global Investment Fund, how do you see, for example, the role of public institutions like Banobras or other international organizations or development banks, for example, to speed up funding in the Latin American and the Caribbean region? How we can contribute from multilateral development organizations to better adjust this agenda to the specific needs of the countries? Well, thank you very much. I'm going to try to sum up our role in the Water Finance Coalition. We have the honor of being invited to this coalition, and also the French Development Agency. And we created a group that seeks to raise a common voice from public development banks in order to better accomplish the Sustainable Development Goals, in particular SDG number 6. And with our involvement, we developed a joint declaration that has been recently presented in the Finance Summit, and we participated in the global study as a public funding institution, LSDG 6. Based on our participation this year in the Water Finance Coalition, what we observed is that public development banks play a key role in the dialogue and in the dissemination of knowledge to leverage best practices and to also learn from the errors in all the regions of the world, and also the need to participate as a development bank in the dialogue with other with broader types of agents in an integrated water management, national authorities, service providers, and also redirect the funds towards the agenda's priorities, for example, climate and biodiversity financing. And from Banobras, where we made a lot of mistakes and where we have identified opportunity areas, let me take advantage of this opportunity to share with you that it's important to coordinate actions and dialogues with other international agencies and with our national authorities. And we need to address, first of all, this misinformed understanding of the financing that takes place in the water sector between the public and private sector. We need to bring together the interest of public and private institutions. We need to improve or avoid deficiencies in the preparation of projects, being more patient in the preparation of the projects, and we need to find out mechanisms for income or revenue extradition, and sometimes we have problems with this, and we need to bridge the gap between misinformation with regard to risk transfer. There is always the public manager and the private risk managers do not understand each other, and sometimes there is a confrontation of their visions, and to the detriment of water. And we hope that we can provide better examples in this regard. Thank you very much, Carlos, and for this brief answer. And these are very important topics. Banobras is leading this project with these international financing institutions in order to leverage the role of national development banks. You raised very, very important aspects to make objectives more compatible. And when we talk about subnational funding, that is to say, federal financing towards provincial, subnational entities, there is this misunderstanding between politics, policies, procedures, and understanding that takes place. And Banobras can play a key role. So now, Gonzalo, as Secretary of ALOAS, and where Ms. Galmarini is the president. ALOAS is an association that brings together several water and sanitation operators in Latin America and the Caribbean. And can you hear me? Gonzalo, the ALOA's objectives includes, for example, developing mechanisms to have common mechanisms of actions. The current reports indicate that 1/4 of the Latin American population has no safe access to drinking water, and more than 65% of the population in the region has no safe access. I mean, not only connection or to the network with regard to SDG 6, and also the lack of appropriate waste disposal and wastewater treatment. What is your approach as president or representative of ALOAS to make investments in water and sanitation more dynamic and towards achieving SDG number 6, and how we can combine financing, and Gonzalo, you mentioned priorities and strategies of ISA with regard to financing, and how can we combine this with reasonable rates for users and subsidies for the low-income population. With regard to the first question, I think that all water associations in Latin America, finances, operators, regulatory agencies, must explain to the world the opportunity that our region offers in terms of water investments. This type of conferences is very useful for this purpose, because Latin America, in the geopolitics global scenario, is not very relevant, and many parts of the world don't pay attention to us. But we play a key role when it comes to water. 650 million inhabitants, 19 billion square meters, and a huge opportunity in our territory, because we have 3 out of the 10 freshwater resources: Brazil, Venezuela, and Peru. Argentina ranks 16, and Colombia among the top 12. So this places the region at the forefront when we talk about climate change. Sometimes it is said that Latin America is a financial debtor, but environment resource creditor. And we talk about different international companies, CEPAL, OCEN. Well, we have the responsibility to show the opportunities of investment that the region offers. And there is another advantage. And most speak the same language. Out of the 650 million inhabitants, 450 speak Spanish, and 200 and something Portuguese. And this can help the landing of different startups and financial institutions. It's a peaceful region. If we consider the war map, we are a very stable region when we talk about disputes, conflicts. So the region is not significantly affected by the climate change. We have some hydric stress or some climate contingencies. We don't see the same disasters as in the Caribbean or Europe or the Southeast. We have large human capital. We are willing to incorporate new technologies, and we have reasonable exchange rates for the dollar, euro, and the yuan, for example. So all these circumstances make the region suitable to explain the opportunities offered by Latin America when we talk about technical opportunities and nature-based solutions. When we talk about water, seems to be the new paradigm for the future of the water, and Latin America can offer a place to test technologies to show that the planet is intelligent, that can have its own resources to regenerate water and make a better use of this scarce resource. And finally, I believe it is important to communicate the word that the region has progressive governments that considers water as a human right, and it's included in the constitutions of each country in the different common markets like the Pacific Partnership or Alliance or the Mercosur. So we invite everybody from ISA to join this train or to embark on this project and to attract investments to the region.
Thank you very much, Gonzalo, for sharing the strategic vision you have. Personally, I worked with Aloas in the past, and I see that adjusting the vision of Aloas to the current world, a world with climate change, but also highlighting the opportunities of Latin America, can be essential. And what could be also the role of water operators in the agenda? Not everyone considers that water providers are a special stakeholder in climate change, but sector stakeholders consider it this way. So I welcome this strategic vision and the nature-based solutions, climate change, and the position of the region to improve the sector in the region. Then the second question for Luis Velasco. We know that in Latin America there are several cases of partnerships, of rural community organizations, even the merge of these committees. Do you consider this could be a strategy to improve sustainability and financing of rural organizations, and what public policies should be promoted to achieve a total coverage of water and sanitation? Please, can you unmute yourself? The truth is that experience has shown that partnerships is a fundamental strategy to increase sustainability and financing of community organizations for water and sanitation. First, because it facilitates the strengthening through exchange of knowledge and experiences, and this shows in higher productivity. Also facilitates access to technologies, but also it strengthens the involvement and the role at a regional level. Public policies that should be promoted to achieve full coverage of water access and sanitation should be based on specific regulatory frameworks according to rural areas, suitable for rural areas in all the region, because definitely the rules are applicable to large water suppliers do not enable service in rural areas and increase of coverage. We should also have and execute sufficient resources to know the sector, and therefore it's important to have connectivity to facilitate communications. The merging of organizations to increase financial sustainability from scale economies has presented more difficulties, especially in social aspects, but also in detriment to the response for service continuity, because they become difficult structures. The strategy should be considered for each particular case and not disseminate as a single solution. To achieve a full water access and sanitation, we need the commitment and full contribution of all the stakeholders, the civil society in general, social organizations, and particularly community management. It's four levels: OXAS organizations, national OXAS federations, and CLOXAS as a fourth level. Local, regional, and national governments. One of the most difficult challenges is to achieve a true and effective cooperation. Autonomous and decentralized agencies that protect the environment, cooperation organizations, private companies, and universities. This is the only strategy that can help to address the lack of good quality water and the lack of sanitation, which we are trying to reverse.
Bueno,
Thank you very much, Luis. We have run out of time. So to conclude, very briefly, we have heard a lot about innovation, innovative financing schemes from Banobras and ISA. This idea of ISA to look for the fine network financing, the schemes Banobras has been implementing, given the tax difficulties Mexico is facing, are very interesting in terms of strengthening the lending, borrowing capacity, and also the CLOCS's strategies, as Mr. Velasco mentioned, to achieve sustainability of systems. And the second part of the thought has to do with the role of regional organizations. ALOAS is one of them, with great strength, as Gonzalo mentioned, and a role to position the region to attract investments. Also, Water Finance Coalition to promote the role of development banks, as Carlos Puente mentioned. And of course, the role of CLOCS's to gather community organizations. I'd like to thank the speakers for your excellent presentations, all the participants, and CAF for your invitation to moderate the panel. Thank you very much, and good afternoon to all of you. Thank you, Gustavo Salpriel, for your moderation and this final summary. And thank you to the panelists, Carlos Puente, Gonzalo Menceliesen, and Luis Velasco, for the excellent presentation on the role of financing and providers, given the challenge of SDGs in water and sanitation. It's a pleasure to join you here, especially on such an important subject for Latin America. Latin America has 43% of renewable water resources in the world, the highest availability of water in the world. The 3,000 cubic meters of water per year exceeds the average around the world. The region has very high water availability. Agriculture in Latin America is affected by climate change differently according to the region and productive efforts. We can see how some regions and countries like Brazil have been strongly affected by climate change, and we can see this in the cost of food, being Brazil one of the largest exporters of food in the world. There's also estimates of the World Bank for 2050 that indicate that pollution of water and the growing need and lack of resources could reduce expectations of economic growth in terms of 6% of GDP. And in some countries, that reduction could achieve 15%. However, the main challenge is that strategies related to water safety in the region have to do with the complex interaction of all the organizations related to this. The lack of water access and access to sanitation, and the institutional weakness and deficient infrastructure. We need actions on the following challenges. First, how to improve supply, distribution, and sustainability of water. Second, how to eliminate pollution and degradation of water quality, one of the main problems in the region. Third, how to improve the weak governance and institutional strengthening and water management through improvements in regulations and governance for effective measures. And finally, the infrastructure required to manage water resources that have that have collapsed in the coming year, in the next years. We need to improve and strengthen supply networks by institutions and ministries of agriculture to promote the work of regional, rural institutions. Public investment, leverage of private investment, and institutional governance lines will be key to maintain and sustain this comparative advantage of the region. Thank you very much. Hello, I'm Manuel Otero, General Director of the Inter-American Institute for American Cooperation, aim to transform and improve the lines. We strengthen water resource measures. We need innovative actions at every level. Agriculture is the main use of water resources at world level. Approximately 70% of fresh water use is destined to the production of food we consume daily. In this scenario, one of the main challenges the society in general and agriculture in particular address is increased productivity levels, but also we need to reduce the degradation of natural resources, especially water resources, and stop soil degradation. As to water, we promote from ICA cooperation for efficient use, especially based, nature-based initiatives, the reuse of water in agriculture, for instance. Together with CAF, we expect joint work. We consider key to work jointly with CAF because a big effort to accelerate transformations to agricultural and water systems, better performance is necessary and urgent. For this, we welcome the cooperation in efforts with strategic partners in rural territories, the public and private sector, and of course the financial sector. With our agricultural producers included in the development of solutions, we will advance at a rate equal to the great challenges ahead. Now we open the last panel of this conference on finance and governance of water in Latin America and the Caribbean towards Dakar 2022. We now have to address financing the risk to eradicate irrigation to eradicate hunger and contribute to food security. We have Laura Melo, the representative of the World Programme of Food, moderating the panel. Thank you very much for the invitation to moderate this panel. It's an opportunity I greatly appreciate to talk about such an important and relevant issue. Food security is essential to us. In Latin America and the Caribbean, this is an issue of great concern, especially if we consider what we have just heard, the impact of climate change in food security with irregular patterns of rainfall and recurring drought. When we talk about promoting food security and finish with hunger and malnutrition, it's essential to talk about water. Most of the people that risk hunger depend on agriculture, so we cannot eradicate hunger if the most vulnerable rural communities do not have access to water to produce food. We're going to talk about the necessary investment to contribute to food security through irrigation and agricultural development. We're going to talk about financing irrigation to eradicate hunger and contribute to food security and the SDG number 2. We have guests for this, Jacinto Delino Pacheco, and the Secretary of a land irrigation system in Ecuador, Martin Matos, General Director of Natural Resources from the Ministry of Agriculture in Uruguay, and Rafael Guas, the Executive Director of Prover Inversión Peru. We're going to start with the first round of questions, but before starting, let me remind the panelists of the time we have. We have around 6 minutes per panelist, so please make sure to be brief in your response. We're going to start with Jacinto Pacheco. As in Ecuador, the irrigated area is around 1 million hectares, whereas the potential irrigation area is almost 3 times that. What are the investment plans in the country to meet SDG number 2 and therefore eradicate hunger and contribute to food security? What are the relevant aspects you consider to achieve this? Good afternoon. We are using a cell phone because there has just been an earthquake in Quito. So we've been evacuated from the building, but I will still answer your questions. The irrigated area in Ecuador and the provinces is around 1.5 million. And we have a border agriculture, irrigated agricultural area of 3 million more. So we're talking about 1.5 million hectares still to be irrigated. And this responds, to go from this irrigated area to the requirement, we need new irrigation systems, new infrastructures. We therefore need agreements with regional governments together with the Ministry of Agriculture. The ministry has an agreement with the World Bank to irrigate around 10,000 hectares until 2022. This seems a small figure compared to the target figure, but we have around 45,000 hectares irrigated until 2025. We could achieve this if there are specific conditions, strengthening irrigation organizations. There could be community, public and public-private partnerships, and prioritize irrigation areas to reduce rural inequality and improve quality of life. We still have a long way to go, so we need to work and reduce this gap of irrigated versus produced areas.
Thank you very much. I hope you are all safe. I am sorry to hear that you are undergoing an earthquake and there are no severe consequences. Thank you then very much for your answer and to raise the challenges that we see in the irrigation system in the country and the PPPs that can really contribute to increasing the coverage of the irrigation system in the country. Mr. Matos, Uruguay is a mainly farming country, one of the key economic activities, and can increase by 5 to 7 times the irrigated surface. This offers opportunities but challenges as well. So as the authority regulating all the natural resources, what is Uruguay's strategy to promote this strategy in a consistent way with the 2030 agenda and the environment agenda? Well, Uruguay, and thank you for inviting me, has some experience in irrigation. Irrigation is a key tool, an opportunity that Uruguay has to sustain its production systems. It is a tool that allows us to have better or higher yield crops and makes systems more resilient because it helps us to have certainties. So against water excess and droughts in other times of the year, having irrigation is very important. And Uruguay's most experienced sector with regard to irrigation is the rice sector, very mature sector. It has very high rice yields, and it is irrigated by surface. There are opportunities for improvement, but it's a sector that has a lot of experience in irrigation. And then the cereal or summer crop like corn and soybean, and then pasture irrigation, where we have more opportunities for growth is in grains or cereal crops. Back in the 90s, Uruguay developed its infrastructure. We built a lot of dams, like for water as water reservoirs. We developed institutionality, for example, the Irrigation Act or the creation of the National Water Agency, my ministry. But I believe that now we need to promote water and irrigation culture. It's not just about irrigating or generating the infrastructure or developing the technology and start watering. We need to have knowledge of the water and the changes that this represents. So Uruguay believes that it is very important to increase the surface area of irrigated crops and irrigated livestock. It will increase its productivity, it will increase soil coverage, and we are always talking about soil and water because the two are pillars for productivity. So by developing culture, technology adoption, we should be able to increase the irrigated surface area in all sectors in Uruguay. Very, very clear this type of developing a culture for water use or irrigation culture to make the increase in water coverage more effective, and the relevance of food systems. Mr. Pita, and from the Pro-Inversión, that is part of the Ministry of Economy, and as a promoter of public and private investment and taxed investments. What are the lessons learned based on the initiatives from PPPs for projects like Samiruchik, almost, that contribute to private investment in other areas of the countries? Are you planning to incorporate some economic incentives to speed up this process? Good morning, everybody. First of all, again, my thanks for this opportunity to share the Peruvian experience in farming investments. And, well, the advances in Peru that aim at including 100,000 new hectares in the coastal area were possible thanks to the regulatory framework that governs the private investment, and also as part of a special laws that allows to include water rates in line with operational and maintenance costs. These mechanisms, and also with the sale of lands, allows us to develop public-private irrigation infrastructures that are self-financed. But this has to do with availability of infrastructure and an efficient water management throughout the life of the project. But we also need to consider the promotion of public-private investment for the development of farming lands and for developing the agribusiness export in order to double or triple the infrastructure cost. So the success of ATPs and the possibility of replicating these in other parts of the country requires for an incentive system. And in Peru, for example, the enactment of agricultural promotion land and FTAs over the past 20 years showed the kickoff of the exporting activity, or an increase of on average 15% a year. And as a result, we have explosive demand for irrigated land that are very important for the development of infrastructure work. In the Peruvian coast, we have potential for 300,000 surface areas that can be part of different PPPs. However, it's not enough, because PPPs on irrigation are not enough. We need to also consider the agribusiness exports. We need to consider the added value chain towards small and medium-sized suppliers. And as a result of this, the state must strengthen the institutional framework to ensure or to make conditions available for this integration, because the organizational cost is not cannot be paid by the private sector alone. It's like having a three-leg table, because that implies improving the opportunity cost and also promoting local communities. In Peru, we are considering integrating this in the Olmos project and the Chavimoche project and irrigation in Majes Siwas 2 project. Thank you. Well, thank you very much for sticking to your times, and thank you for the comments that you made with regard to the value of PPPs and the regulatory or law frameworks and the support that is important to include small farmers so as to develop the farming sector and the irrigation sector and make it beneficial for the small producers and farmers, and that can be part of the production chain of food systems. Now, the second round of questions. Mr. Jacinto del Pino Pacheco, can you answer my second question? I don't know if you are in a condition to answer the question. Ecuador is known to having a family agriculture, which is quite extensive, but it also has intensive farming, agribusiness, agro-exporting sectors. The question is, as it was mentioned by Peru, how can we make progress in both directions so that we can supplement financing in both areas, in agriculture, in irrigation, but both for the agribusiness and for the small farmers? I think that Mr. Jacinto Pacheco probably is not in a position to answer. So I will then move to our second panel member, Mr. Matos. And my question to you is in line with the previous question. What measures can we promote to foster a more efficient use of water in the irrigated farming areas? What are the mechanisms that we can use for national and foreign investment and the value chain? Which is the role of the state to improve production practices in the region? Yes, improvements and efficiencies in irrigation and water use are very important. Water, as I mentioned before, the water culture, the irrigation quota. Water is a very, very valuable resource and a very weak one or fragile one. So we need to be aware of how we use it, and therefore we need to take care of water. And the better we use it, the best. We have, as a state, we have policy in place. Some things are already or have already been implemented, others are underway. For example, the regulatory framework for PPPs, the irrigation law that has been passed some years ago, the second irrigation law in Uruguay. The institutionality is adjusted to sustainable irrigation across the country and across all the sectors. The Bureau of Natural Resources is addressing water and soil issues, and the National Bureau or the National Water Bureau as the oversight authority, and the public-private relationship under environmental sustainability that includes different steps that promote agriculture irrigated by each country's basin. Each basin is divided in sub-basins, and we can see different irrigating foundations that are important for the development of projects. Sometimes the projects include different plots of land, so these associations of irrigators are very important, and we need to have a regulatory framework and promoting new projects adjusted to the different conditions. There are different sources, dams, direct connections, but we have different situations in different irrigation situations. The modernization and consolidation of existing irrigation systems, looking for opportunities for improvement, support to irrigating farmers, and refurbishing existing irrigation systems with new technology, measure volumes and flows. That is very important. Financing tailored to promote public-private investments, research to meet current needs and to anticipate the future evolution. We consolidate basic irrigation information. We develop forage farming systems with irrigation and drainage. It's not just irrigation systems that are for just a specific sector, but the farming sector at large, or the rice sector, rotate together with the livestock sector, and then transfer of knowledge to reach all stakeholders involved, businessmen, service providers. Can you wrap up, please? Because we are... And finally, monitoring of implementation and assessment of the irrigation strategy impact. Well, this is the situation in Uruguay. Thank you very much for your presentation. It's very comprehensive, very complete, based on this idea that water is a valuable resource and we must use it in a smart fashion, and how important it is to use it under public-private investments and the regulatory framework that must be in place to support current investments. My second question then to Mr. Pitas. So, are you familiar with the situation in other countries, and in your opinion, which are the success factors to increase private investment in the region, and what should be the role of the state to support or endorse more investments in the farming sector? Now, going to the first portion of your question, the key factor for success for private investment in the region is to ensure foreseeability or foresight with regard to the macroeconomic and social situation in the country. When there is chronic political instability, it's going to be very difficult to promote policies aimed at the public investment. Peru was successful in this regard because until recently it underwent sustained political and economic sustainability. Then we need to have an institutional and legal framework that is in line with the different financing mechanisms. And the regulations that are required must be flexible to accommodate to different bureaucratic situations. And some aspects to consider, for example, legal certainty, respect for or abiding or compliance with the agreements, conflict settlement resolutions included in the agreement, etc. And going to the second portion of your question, in the case of irrigation PPPs, the state was partially involved. And the contribution was reimbursable, the contribution by the state. And if it is not reimbursable, it has a multiplying effect in the private sector and helps develop projects. In the case of ATPs in Peru, every dollar invested by the state, the private sector invests 5 times more. And then another mechanism that can be promoted by the state is temporary tax incentives for the expansion of farming opportunities, like the implementation in Peru of the Farming Act, TLC, or the FTAs, promoted by the different Peruvian administrations in the past 20 years helped to open up the market to traditional and non-traditional farming practices. And Latin Americans should continue developing these to improve their competitive advantages in the rest of the countries. When we talk about small and medium-sized farmers, the states can create additional instruments that help improve their production through technology and through connection with other markets. And Peru has also generated some incentives. Also, the states should support and protect small and medium-sized farming, including the insertion in the production chain or marketing chain. Thank you very much. So, thank you very much. Very, very interesting items when you talk about the need of having political stability, legal certainty to promote private investments in the region. And then this has to be balanced by the state involvement in financing small and medium-sized farmers to participate in the chain.
I think some of the most important or relevant points have to do with the idea of PPPs, the need to create incentives both for large farmers and small, medium-sized farmers to get in the productive chain and food systems. The need to have a law, an institutional system promoting the partnerships among the different sectors of the country and PPPs. Thank you, the three panelists that join us on this important debate on food security and the role of irrigation in promoting the fight against hunger. Thank you very much to the CAF again for promoting this debate. Thank you, Laura Melo, for moderating the panel, and thank you to our panelists, Luis Pita, Matos, and Ugas, in the challenges to achieve SDG number 2 to stop or eradicate hunger. Costa Rica is acknowledged at the international level because of its environmental sustainable policies. We have developed emission-free energy network, reduce contamination, pollution, and we are also fighting climate crisis, integrating resilience in public policy. However, wastewater treatment requires more challenges. The gap is larger. In the last few years, we have up from 4.4 to 15% coverage into its system with new water treatment plants and some others that require more attention. Reducing these gaps in basic service access is a commitment of this country. This has been defined in different planning elements, water, fresh water, policies and sanitation, accompanied with a regulation plan to generate the implementation of SDGs at different levels, both at national and international level. We also updating policy and the integrated water management plan, including access to water as a human right. We have defined an overall view focused on knowledge, citizen participation, and access to information. We aim at reducing inequalities to water access and reduce the vulnerability for adjustment to climate change. In terms of drought and flooding, the Ministry of Environment and Energy, together with the National Committee of Meteorology, has moved to diagnose, creating scenarios to develop policies and roadmap for implementation involving the private sector and state institutions. These are the tools to implement the necessary policies to meet the goals. We have great challenges ahead, but these indicators help us advance on the proper path. Thank you very much. Fresh water, improved bathrooms, and good hygiene are critical to all, especially in pandemic and crisis age. Latin America and Caribbean, 60 million people drink water that is not safe. 44 million people have no basic sanitation, and 4 of every 10 schools have no basic sanitation for washing hands. We still have to work together with governments and allies to achieve sustainable financial mechanisms, reinforce national monitoring systems, and find solutions to promote resilience and risk management, including the risk of climate change, to bridge the gaps of access to basic hygiene and sanitation to most vulnerable, including children and poor households and Aboriginal people, refugees and migrants in the rural areas. UNICEF considers need to invest $500 million. The pandemic establishes a scenario to improve sanitation and have hygiene water in the households. We have to make the best of this opportunity. We count on your support. Thank you very much. Let me remind you that you can review the highlights of the event and share your views on social media through with hashtag towards Dakar 2022. You can see the videos of the presentations through the website. And to conclude, we are going to review the first day of Finance and Governance of Water in Latin America and the Caribbean towards Dakar 2022 Congress, introducing water finance ahead the SDGs. In the first 2 panels, reviewing SDG 6 from law and regulatory vision. We have explored the ways to increase substantially financing to achieve the 2030 agenda, considering that we are facing a complex scenario because of the pandemic, and the most vulnerable scenarios have been the most affected. We have witnessed very interesting opinions, especially the urgent need to incorporate financing, innovative and more effective financing instruments to bridge the needs, adding higher resource participation from the private sector, especially from the green funds. And the third panel dealt with water and food safety through the interconnection with the SDG and SDG 6 and 2, understanding that it is essential to eradicate hunger and contribute to food safety. We have also checked the efficiency that is essential given the climate change and the growing scarcity of water. With these brief words summarizing the most relevant of the first day, thank you very much for your assistance, and we hope you will join us tomorrow to talk about water governance. We greet you, all of you from CAF,